So for me, for a lot of people, we probably universally have experiences where we are like, okay, if God would just do something miraculous right in front of my eyes, then I would believe, or then my faith would be bigger, or then my faith would be wider, or whatever. If God would just do something miraculous right in front of my face. And, we even maybe say that to God. God, if you do something great, and I wonder, it's always kind of weird to put words in God's mouth, but I wonder if God sometimes says, well, you want a miracle? How about this? How about I create a rock so big that you could live on it and fine-tune everything about it and around it so that life can not only survive there, but thrive there? How about if I do that for you? And we're like, no, we want something really miraculous. So maybe God's like, okay, how about this? How about I put a 576 megapixel camera? Now, how about if I put two 587 megapixel cameras in the front of your head and connect those cameras to a 3,000 gigahertz computer so that you can perceive and see and understand, and that in that computer there's enough memory, there's enough RAM in there for you to not only understand things, but pass those things down from generation to generation to generation. Would that be a big enough miracle for you? And we're like, no, that's not really quite enough. How about this little trick? God's like, okay, well, while the speaker is speaking, and before the speaker finishes the next sentence, 50,000 cells in your body will die, and they will be replaced by 50,000 more cells before the sentence is over that he's speaking, and you won't have to do anything to make that happen. How about that? Is that good enough? No. How about a healing, God? We want to see a miraculous healing. And I think, again, it's dangerous to put words in God's mouth. But God might be like, you know what? That 3,000 gigahertz computer I put inside your skull, that thing is so awesome that you'll be able to heal because you'll understand and you'll figure out the natural world and how your bodies are created. You'll be able to heal yourself of almost anything. I don't just heal people. I've created a species of self-healers. How about that one? And we're like, no, I want to see more, God. I want to see more. You see where I'm going with this? I think when I look around, and the older I've gotten, it's like God is creating and has created a miracle that we live within, and that sometimes God is so apparent, God is so much around us that we fail to see God's very presence that we live inside this miracle. Well, we're in the next episode of this series called Bystander, and today we're going to be looking at a healing story. But the subtitle of this is John and the rabbi from Nazareth. And what we're doing is we're following John, the writer of the Gospel of John, and the three letters. He also wrote three little letters that are in our New Testament. We're looking at John as John journeys with Jesus. And the interesting thing about John, as he writes this down, he's near the end of his life. He's like a 90-year-old man, and somebody has convinced him, John, you got to write this stuff down for us, what you saw, what you heard. And he's either writing it or more likely dictating it to someone else who's writing it down. And John is like, okay, I'm gonna write this and center it around 7 events. He called them signs. And he was like, these signs aren't just going to tell you what Jesus did. The signs are going to tell you who Jesus is. And John documents all of that so that later generations, he's talking about you and me, later generations will be able to see what he saw through his eyes. But John's agenda is not simply that we would know what happened. That's not his agenda. His agenda is that we would be convinced that Jesus is who Jesus said he was. And so John actually puts his agenda. This is why I'm writing this down for you. He puts it at the very end of his gospel. We're going to hit it every week just to remind us. This is John 20. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. He's talking about the Gospel of John. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, here it is, you may have life in his name. So that's John's agenda, and he organizes it around these 7 events that we're looking at that he calls signs. And John's pretty clear, too, as he paints out his whole gospel. He's like, I'm not asking you to believe in belief. I'm not asking you to have faith in faith. I am asking you to follow because I saw these things, and because I saw these things, I chose to follow, and I hope as you see them, you choose to follow as well. And then he tells us why. I'm telling you these things, and And if you follow, here's what happens: life. Full life, a life with purpose, a life with meaning, a life that is connected, a life that, well, he says it's the life that really is life. John had an agenda, all right, and I think it's an amazing, absolutely amazing agenda. So I want to encourage you, before we move any further, to do two things. The two things that I always ask you to do. One, jot down some notes. It helps us to move from being consumers to being messengers, from being consumers to being ambassadors. So jot some notes down, because God will use you and create some divine appointments for you. Those notes might come in handy. The second thing is to use the reflection guides. Those are available through our website, and they'll help you to enter into the scriptures so you can listen for God's voice. Don't take my word for it. Open the book for yourself and see how God speaks to you. So today, I told you that we're looking at a healing. It's the healing. This is the sign of the healing of the blind man. And let me catch you up a little bit on what has happened over the course of the gospel, because we haven't really looked at verse by verse and where Jesus has been and how he's traveled, but he's gone from the northern part of Israel down to the southern part. He spends a little bit of time in Galilee, then he goes down to Judea where Jerusalem is. He's back and forth. It's not a very long journey. It's like 2 days one way, 2 days the other. Jesus never really traveled very far. But when he's in Judea, he gets into trouble almost every time. Because in Judea is the city of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the epicenter of the Jewish faith. The temple is there. The religious leaders are concentrated there in Jerusalem. And whenever Jesus goes, he's healing, he's teaching, and the religious leaders are threatened by what he does. So Jesus then, when he kind of stirs things up, he goes back home to his stomping grounds up in Galilee, and then he'll go back to Jerusalem, and that's where we find him today. Here is what is happening. Let me just tell you, Jesus is walking down the street with his disciples, and here's what happens. John 9, 1 through 2. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. This story generates lots of questions in my mind. I don't know, questions that you have, but one of the ones that jumps out at me when we read a little just kind of statement like that is, how did they know he was blind? How did they know he was blind from birth? You know, it could have been anything. How did they know these things? Well, the reality is everybody knew everybody. This guy sat at the same spot every day begging. They knew his story. They knew his name. The other Gospels call him Bartimaeus. You know, they knew his parents' names. They knew this guy's story. They knew he was blind from birth. So they see this guy. And then remember, Jesus wasn't the only rabbi around, right? I mean, there are lots of rabbis, and rabbis always had disciples following them around. And the way rabbis taught oftentimes was simply to go about normal life and then talk about what we're doing, what we're seeing. And so as they're going down the street, the disciples, in a very normal rabbi-disciple relationship, say, hey, Jesus. Here, well, let's look at the text. The text says it this way. John 9, he says, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind? Now, I am hoping, and you are hoping at this point, that they whispered that question. Unless it was Peter. You know, Peter's like, hey, Jesus, there's blind Bart. I got a theological question. Why is he blind? Did he sin, or did Jeff and Jane, you know them, did they sin to cause him to be born blind? And the question that they're asking reveals something, doesn't it? Well, it reveals a way of thinking, a way of looking at the world, a way of understanding sin and consequences and punishment and all that. And it's a way of thinking that isn't totally gone from some Christians today. And the way of thinking is that when something bad happens, well, God must be punishing that person. Something bad happens, so God must be punishing. And the ancient rabbis actually said that a baby could sin within the womb and then need punishment, or a baby could, or a child could experience the punishment of the sins that the parents did. That was a theological way of thinking, and lots of us have thought that way before, haven't we? Probably everybody in this room at one time or another. Something bad happens and we think, oh, God is punishing me. You know, I did this bad thing, and therefore God is punishing me. That must be the math, the divine math. Well, Jesus is about to shift their paradigm and ours, if that's our paradigm right now, in what he says next. Here's what he says. He's talking to his disciples, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame, There is no such cause effect here. Look instead for what God can do. Now, I think we need to pause for just a second and understand that sometimes some of the bad things that happen in our lives are consequences of those actions. I mean, there are just some actions that have very natural consequences, but consequences and punishment are two different things. Theologically speaking, what we're told over and over in our scriptures is that Jesus took our punishment on himself. The cross stands as a symbol that says Jesus paid a price for our sin we could not pay. He took our punishment on himself. So the bad stuff that happens in our life is not God saying, well, you did wrong, I'm going to punish you. No, it's just the way the system is designed. We have consequences. An action has an opposite, an equal reaction. One of the laws of physics. So we need to make sure that we're understanding all that. And I look at it in terms of how God can take our suffering and make something good come from it. There are 5 people in our church right now that I know of, just 5 that I know of, that have terminal illness. And I got to tell you, God did not give them cancer. God did not give them kidney failure. God did not give them COPD. You wouldn't give an illness to your disobedient child. God would never give something like that to one of his children. And when I hear about those folks, I pray for those people every day, sometimes several times a day. I pray that God would make himself very clearly, palpably known to them and their family as they walk through this. I also pray that God would give them an out-of-the-park, home run, miracle healing. I never stop praying for those either, but I also know that's not how God typically works. When God does work that way, we call that what? What do we call it? We call it a miracle. We call it a miracle, a suspension of the laws of nature. But each of these 5 people, here's what I want you to understand. Each of these 5 people, in their own way, is working hard to show the people around them the work of God in their lives, in the middle of their suffering. They're trying hard to use these moments of illness in their lives to show people and introduce people to Jesus and how they're spending their time and how they talk and how they spend their resources and how they're using their energy, their limited energy and their time. They're trying to point people toward the God they love. And what I hear them saying is things like this, cancer may take my life, kidney failure may take my life, but neither of these own my life. I owe every bit of my existence to the God who created me, who loves me, who's working with me through this. They're taking their time of illness and trying to bring glory to God through that. All of them in their own way are saying, God, somehow use this terrible thing I'm going through to do something good, something that points people toward you. See, I think our suffering is always an opportunity for God to do something through us if we let God do it. If we let God do it. That gives meaning to our suffering when we put it into God's hands. So I think that's one side of the coin of suffering, that when we're in the midst of it, we can actually point people to God through our suffering. The other side of suffering is, I think, that when we who are not suffering are helping someone who is, by how we encourage, by how we sacrifice for them. When someone's down and they need help, we're glorifying God in the face of their suffering by helping them out. And I think that's what Jesus was getting at when he said these words in Matthew. He said, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. I mean, how does that happen? Oh, I think about our work with our Afghan family that we're helping to relocate and what we're doing there, getting their apartment set up and ready, and working with Della Lamb so that they're ready to get into English as a second language program and those classes, and helping them with their documents and helping them find doctors and get to appointments and helping them with childcare. Let me tell you, that's letting your light shine every time we help somebody in the midst of their suffering. What are we doing? We're shining the light of Christ. We're making God known. Now, we got to take a look in this story, though, specifically at how Jesus heals this guy. And this is a little earthy. It's a little bit gross, and that's kind of why I like it. Here it is. Here's how Jesus heals this blind man. Jesus spit in the dust, made a clay paste with the saliva, rubbed the paste on the man's eyes, and said, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. That's actually in the text, that explanation. The man went and washed and saw. And I have so many questions about this. Like why? Why the dirt and the spit? I mean, there's so many other healings where Jesus doesn't do this. In fact, there's sometimes Jesus heals from a distance. Like, yeah, your son is healed. All right, there's no spit involved in that one, Well, why this one? And then the question pops into my mind, did he ask the guy, "You mind if I put some mud spit in your eyes?" Or was it like, "Peter, John, hold him down"? What was going on there? What happened that day? We got to remember, John's telling us this isn't about the event. These are signs that point to something. Jesus scooped up what? What did he scoop up? Dirt. He scooped up dirt. Does that phrase, scooping up dirt, remind you of anybody else in the Bible who scooped up dirt and did something beautiful with it? Anything? Any bells ringing? Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, God scoops up dirt, dust from the earth, breathes life into it, creates human beings. What is John doing? He's pointing us back to Genesis. When human beings were created and in that story, that archetypal story of creation, and saying what Jesus is doing is restoring broken humanity. It isn't just about the event, it's a sign. Jesus is restoring broken humanity. I love this part, the dirt and the spit. I love this part. It speaks to me for some reason, because when you think about dirt in general it's pretty much nothing, isn't it? I mean, a handful of dirt has no value. Can't do much with it. It's unhygienic. I feel dirty right now. It's unhygienic. Dirt is not glamorous. It's not sexy. Dirt's so ordinary. Dirt is so ordinary, but you add a little bit of Jesus. You see it? You add a little bit of Jesus, and suddenly it becomes something extraordinary. Extraordinary. And I don't know if you relate to this. I relate to this because for so much of my life, I felt just like dirt, just worthless, not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, not enough, just ordinary, kind of worthless, unhygienic, gross. That's what you talk to my kids, they're like, "Yeah, that part definitely, Dad, is gross." But something happened in my life. And I got a little bit of Jesus. And all of a sudden, my life changed. And I still know that all I am is just dirt and a little bit of Jesus. And crazy stuff starts happening. So what about you? I mean, you ever felt that way in your life? I'm dirty. God doesn't use people like me. I'm not smart enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not whatever enough. You ever felt that? I just got to tell you, God can take you, me, add a little bit of himself, and suddenly stuff starts happening. We got to learn that. This is part of the story, right? This isn't just a miracle. What is it? It's a sign. So Jesus puts this paste of dirt and spit on the man's eyes, and then he tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. Again, like why this little other element in the healing? Why does he have to go wash in the pool of Siloam? I think it's sort of parallel to when Jesus is turning the water into wine, that miracle that we talked about already. And it's like he tells the servants, "Take these jars and go fill them up with water." I mean, Jesus could have just filled the jars, right? If he's going to change the water into wine, he could have just done it without that. But it's taking the step. It's the fact that we all have to play a part in what God wants to do. And God is going to do most everything in these amazing things in our lives, but God's still gonna be like, you've got to do your part. You got to take a step. You got to head toward that thing. We can't just sit back and say, all right, do the miracle, do the thing. God's always partnering with us to make that happen. And that's one of the big things that we try to do around Lent and special times of the year. All the time, but especially in these concentrated seasons like Lent, where we keep telling you, don't let these be what? Oh, 2 people got it. We're taking Lent another 40 days if you all don't get this. Don't let these be ordinary days, the days of Lent. Don't let these be ordinary days. Because we think, okay, so what good does it do for me to do something different for 40 days? This is 40 days out of 365. Is it going to make any difference at all? Well, that's why we say, okay, so maybe you choose to fast 1 day a week. I don't know if anybody's done that. You choose to fast. You choose to give something up or to take something up. You're like, okay, I'm not good at getting into my Bible, but I'm going to do that for 40 days. Well, is it going to do any good? Is it going to really change me just to spend 5 minutes reading a book, a Bible, whatever? Well, it's us doing our part. It's us taking the steps to the pool of Siloam so that in the doing of that small thing, big things happen. Our eyes are opened. So see what I'm talking about? So much of the Christian life is like, well, what are you going to do, God? And God's like, I'm going to do everything except I need you to be in it. Take a few steps to the pool of Siloam. It's part of what we do, part of why Lent is so important. And then I think what John's trying to communicate with us here is who we are in the story of the healing of the blind beggar. And we are the blind beggar. I think that's ultimately what John wants us to get. He's like, okay, we're all in that place of being the blind beggar. We're all at that place of wanting light and wanting hope and wanting to see. And John's saying, it all happens, really? It all happens when we take those steps toward Jesus, when we invite Christ to do something in us. And, he's kind of telling us that until that happens, we're all walking in darkness and in blindness. And that doesn't make us a bad person, right? If that's where we are, it just means we haven't quite seen the light yet. And according to John, when you put your trust in Jesus, you begin to see who God is, right? We all want to know that. We get glimpses. You can't see all of who God is, but you get a glimpse. You begin to see who you are. You begin to see how God is working through you. Again, I remind you, when we read John's gospel, there are lots of different levels. And I think if you wonder why the pool of Siloam, I think one of the answers is that John's talking to us about baptism. Because there's a connection between baptism and belief. What's John's goal? He told us his agenda. I'm telling you all these stories so that you might believe. You might believe and that you might have life. And what we believe is that belief and baptism are connected. When we come to that place where we say, yes, Jesus, I believe. I don't understand everything, but I believe, then the next thing is baptism. And I just want to let you know that if you haven't been baptized, what a great thing to do. Or if you feel like I've wandered away. A lot of people use that language, I wandered away. I always wonder, where did you wander? Well, there's a story there. I wandered away, and I've come back, and if you've been baptized before, maybe it's time to be reaffirmed. And you can be baptized or be reaffirmed at any time. You just call us up, and we'll do that in worship. Or this summer, we're going to do a lake baptism. If you want to be immersed, we'll tell you more about that later. But I think in August, we're going to let's make sure the water's warm, right? And we'll do a lake baptism. But baptism and belief are connected. And I think in this story, John's saying, this is important. Baptism is a powerful thing. Don't make excuses if you've never been or if it's been a while since you reaffirmed. It's a big deal. One last thing in this story is that after the guy's healed, the religious leaders question him about who healed him, how it happened, and when. And that causes a big ruckus because Jesus healed this guy on what day? What day? We're talking the Sabbath. He healed him on the Sabbath day. And the Jewish law was very clear. Do not work on the Sabbath. And then it became even clearer because the religious leaders created all these hundreds, even thousands of restrictions on defining what work was. Guess what? Creating clay is work, even if it's just a little bit and it's with your own spit. It's still clay. That's work. Healing, that's work. Jesus broke the law twice. And one of the clear communications in this and many of the other times and many of the other things that Jesus did is that Jesus chose love over law every time. He even said that the Sabbath is made for man, human beings. The Sabbath is made for human beings. Human beings are not made for the Sabbath. And Jesus' attitude was, if I can heal somebody, why would I wait one day to do it when it can happen now? So he heals the guy. And he heals the guy when the religious leaders are there saying, hey, we've got God in a box. And God tells us that life is meant to be lived this way. And God loves these people and nobody else. And then anytime that happens, Jesus is like, oh, really? Watch this. Watch this. The religious leaders, ultimately, by the way, that's what got Jesus killed, right? The religious leaders call in the formerly blind man, and they question him about his healing, and they accuse Jesus to this healed guy. They say, this sinner, they call Jesus this sinner, this imposter, this lawbreaker. And I love what this guy says. He says, talking about Jesus, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, and now I see. And I think this guy is teaching you and me how to shine the light, right? I hear it all the time. Christians, longtime Christians that have been just starting their faith, they're like, well, I don't know how to share my faith because I don't have I can't answer a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of knowledge. I don't have a lot of vast biblical knowledge. I had a buddy of mine, pastor friend of mine, say, Aaron, you don't have vast biblical knowledge. You have half-vast biblical knowledge. It isn't about how much you know. Shining the light is about, here's how I was. Here's what happened. I encountered Jesus. And here's where I am now. That's all it is. Here's how I was. Had this encounter with Jesus. And here's how I am now. We can all do that, right? I was blind, but now I see. I think this guy is saying, look, I don't know everything. I don't understand everything, but I don't have to understand everything to believe something. Right? Isn't that cool? Isn't that beautiful? I don't have to understand everything to believe something. I don't have to be able to explain everything to believe what is right in front of my eyes that now can see. Let's remember, these miraculous signs that John writes about are not something Jesus once did. John's not interested in you remembering that a blind guy was healed and Jesus got in trouble one day. That's not what John is interested in us remembering. John wants us to know that we are all blind beggars. And that it's when we come to Jesus that we actually see. Our eyes are opened. So I don't know if this is where you are. Are you tired of being blind? Have you, maybe more like the Pharisees, maybe you're in this place, you've put God in a neat, tidy little box. Maybe that's the part of the story that resonates with you. Or maybe you just feel like, I get the dirt thing. That's why this story's speaking to me, because I just feel like dirt. But you know what a little bit of Jesus can do now? If any of that rings with you, then I would say this is your sign. And Jesus is still the Lord of light. And he's inviting you to come follow. And you don't need to know everything to believe in something. You don't need to know everything to believe in something. And that's the sign. And for today, that's the good news. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.